So Japan had to return to feudalism, create a drug, make the whole world addicted to it, blame Israel for it, link up with Texas, and threaten global nuclear war against Islam. And the only question we have is, who's to blame? Cheers. Welcome back, everybody. We're here to talk about the downfall of Dan Simmons. This is the 7th and final installment of this series where we look at the science fiction works of American writer Dan Simmons to look at how he turned from a moderately conservative and libertarian sci-fi author into a raging right-wing Islamophobe in just about 20 years. And today we're here to talk about the last book, that is Flashback. And that's going to be the wrap-up for this one. Alright, so, first thing first, there will be triggering things in this book because it's full of racism and other isms, and if you don't want to learn about that kind of stuff, I fully understand you. It's pretty painful, even for me, and I burst with privilege, so there you go. I will spoil the whole thing, so there will be full spoiler summaries of the plot, sort of, so if you really, really want to read the book and don't want to get spoiled, I don't know, maybe read the book first. It's not that long, well, it's like 550 pages of nonsense, but there you go. And with that being said, let's get into the video. Part 1. The struggles. See, this is my third attempt at making this video, and the reason is, this book makes me really, really angry. It made me really angry when I read it 11 years ago when it first came out, and now it makes me even more angry. The question is, how do you make a video about such a book? And it would be easy to go and just, like, quote some really reprehensible shit from this book, and make fun of Dan Simmons and all of that. There's videos like that on the internet, and they're doing really well, but I don't want to do that. I want to do something more, which is why we did this whole series and looked at all these 7 books. So I want to, explain or come up with possible explanations of why we ended up here and how it fits into a larger picture. And that's kind of hard to do when you're also seething with rage against all the terrible shit in this book. But I'll do my best, and I'll structure it like this. I'll start with the actual plot, then we'll go to the setting, then we look at how the setting is a larger, like a symptom of something larger, which is a specific worldview, and then we look at how that worldview then recontextualizes everything else, which is where we end up with it. So yeah, let's see if I can actually manage that. Summary of the plot. Alright, see, this is a thriller, a near-future thriller. It is doing all the things that a political thriller / hard-boiled detective story is about to do, because Dan Simmons is still a talented writer. He knows how to put them words together so they make sense. So what do we get? We get ex-cop, down on his luck, Nick Bottom, named after a Shakespeare character, because of course he is, who is hired by a rich billionaire to solve the murder of his son. He used to be a police detective, now he's a private detective, and he was in charge of the murder investigation 6 years ago as a cop and couldn't solve it then, so now he has to try again as a private detective. And, that part is very much standard, and it's pulled off in a, competent way. And of course, he stumbles on something that is much larger, because this is not just a, private detective, hard-boiled story. This is a political thriller, so there is a conspiracy. And of course, the victim, Keigo Nakamura, died because of, that conspiracy. He uncovered that conspiracy and was a threat to the plans of someone very, very powerful. So we'll find out all about that. Also, the reason for Nick Bottom being a drug addict and being, losing his job was the death in a car accident of his wife 6 years ago, shortly after the murder of that other guy, Keigo Nakamura. And, of course, we'll find out that her car accident was actually a murder connected to the larger conspiracy. Once again, this is just, par for the course when we're talking about political thrillers. It all connects because, they're built around conspiracies, and conspiracies connect everything. That's just how that shit works. So, what else is going on in this book? There's 2 more characters, those being Val Bottom, or Val Fox Bottom, who is Nick Bottom's son, and there is Leonard Fox, who is Nick Bottom's father-in-law. Once Nick, dropped out of police and became a drug addict, he sent his son to live with his grandfather in LA. Val is very much on the edge of becoming a criminal and has to flee LA together with his with his grandfather, because of outbreaks of race riots and the likes. We'll get to that. So they make their way to Denver, Colorado, where they meet up with Nick Bottom on a trucker convoy, and, well, then they meet up, everything comes together, and they have to flee to Texas because of reasons. And everyone is happy ever after. That's the end. And if you think, why are those two other characters in the book? Well, mostly for Dan Simmons to preach, because this is, as I said, a thriller, and it's a political thriller. So let's talk about the politics. Alright, the next part, of course, because this is a political thriller, is to look at the world and the conspiracy that is behind the rather simple crime plot. And that's where things become really weird and bad. Alright, let's look at it. America has been going down the drain for a while. We don't exactly know when things went really bad, but there is the day it all hit the fan, which is apparently one day that no one really knows when. Somewhere between 2011, when the book was written, and 2032-ish, which is when the novel is set. It's not quite clear when, because some of the dates don't really match up, but it's roughly 2032, so in 10 years from now. America, you got something to look forward to. Anyway, since then, the United States have shrunken to 44 and a half states. Some states have been taken over by Mexicans. So Texas has seceded and has become the Republic of Texas, and the rest of America is groaning under debt because of a lot of social entitlement programs instituted by Barack Obama, who is the bad guy of this novel, so to speak. It also has, given in all international activities. It has bowed down to Islam and a lot of these kind of things. So civilization has basically broken down, and all of America, of the United States of America, is now addicted to Flashback, a drug that lets you relive memories, possibly happy memories, mostly happy memories, or things that you believe are happy. People are basically living in the past and have seen America slip down, and they prefer to live in the past instead of facing the present and the future. Now, there's obviously a metaphor here. It's a ham-fisted metaphor, but a metaphor nevertheless. So let's appreciate that, because there'll be more. The rest of the world. See, and there is the global caliphate, because Islam is the fastest growing religion in the world, and it has taken over basically all of Europe and Canada, because those countries let in refugees and bow down to them and allow them to institute Sharia law for reasons. We'll just take it for now and accept that this is how Dan Simmons decided to build his world, but just make notes of those kind of things. So there's that. Russia has also kind of fallen down some, just like the US, I guess, and both those countries are now hiring out their military as mercenaries called United Nations troops that are directed by mostly India and Japan, and are fighting their wars mostly in China for reasons, and also in Europe for reasons, possibly against each other, possibly against the global caliphate of Islam. Now, let's just take all of that and accept it. Now, also what happened is that the global caliphate actually attacked Israel with nuclear weaponry, killed 6 million Jews. That figure is definitely there on purpose. Dan Simmons even talks of the Second Holocaust. And during that attack, it was revealed that the drug Flashback, that all the rest of the world is sort of addicted to, was actually produced in Israel, or developed in a military bioweapons laboratory in Israel. So no one's really too upset about the whole war thing, because they kind of had it coming, because they were developing really, really dangerous drugs as bioweapons. Or so the story goes. Alright, so What's the conspiracy? See, the conspiracy is that actually the drug Flashback was developed by Japan. Why is not quite clear, but we'll get there. And Israel was just blamed for it. There is also rumors of a drug called Flashback 2 that does not only allow people to relive their memories, but also allows them to construct full-on dream realities that are all positive and no negatives, because the drug, cuts out all the negative emotions and stuff. Everyone is waiting for Flashback 2 to hit the street, or believing that it doesn't exist. And Keigo Nakamura, in his film documentary that he was shooting, actually talked about Flashback 2, talked with people that are going to distribute it, and revealed all of the stuff that it was also produced by Japan to make the United States just live in a dream world where everything is still okay. There's another metaphor for you, right there. And because of that, he was killed by his father. Well, killed by one of his father's underlings and hired assassin, but nevertheless, killed by him because, of course, Nakamura Dad is very much one of the leaders of feudal Japan and can't actually have anything of that sort going on. Now, the question is, why? And this is where it all kind of comes together. See, global Islam is the biggest threat to the world, and someone has to face up to it. And what with, the Barack Obama going to Cairo and saying to Muslims, hey, look, maybe we should kind of be nicer to them, before he started ordering all those drone strikes, but we're not talking about those, apparently meant that America gave up on all of that. And so someone else has to take up the torch, and that someone else is Japan. Now, Japan has realized in this world that democracy doesn't work for Japan. Why? It's not really explained, but it's probably racist. So they have reverted to feudalism, capitalist feudalism of big corporations duking it out to decide who will be the new shogun. There's another bad symbol there, because of course one of the murder victims was reading the book Shogun, because Dan Simmons likes to put literary references in his books. Anyway, so they are duking it all out because Japan has to be on a wartime footing, led by a shogun, to take on global Islam in a apocalyptic final battle for humanity and the world, which will be a nuclear conflict, because it has to, for reasons. But it's very much made clear that it has to be a nuclear conflict. And of course, America is useless, has given up, so Japan had to do all of that to be ready to defeat global Islam. That's the big conspiracy and worldview behind this novel. All right, so now you know all of that. Let's look at the bigger picture and the mindset behind it. All right. How do you come up with that kind of idea? And this is where we need to look at Dan Simmons, American history, and things like that. See, in Olympus and the video about Olympus, which apparently got flagged as sensitive content by Twitter, which, yay! Well, we talked about how 9/11 was a national trauma and led to a lot of rethinking and asking of questions in media, politics, and just, society. And that's understandable. That's very understandable. I'm very much with that. National traumas are kind of hard to deal with, speaking as a German. But that's the big problem that we need to look at here now. See, one way of looking at the whole situation is the question like, why did this happen? How could this have happened? And there's a lot of different answers you can give to that. One of them is assuming that, yes, it happened because the United States seemed to be weak. They projected weakness that allowed someone else to feel confident enough to attack 9/11, which is sort of why you have this, parallels drawn to Pearl Harbor, which are, kind of mentioned here with Japan again, and so forth. And the answer then, of course, is to be hard and project actual military and so forth force and power in the world so no one could ever dare to attack the United States on their own ground. And if you come up with that very specific answer, there's further questions to ask. And, in the first couple of years after 9/11, that's exactly how the US reacted with wars in Afghanistan and then in Iraq to, show strength, show that you can't fuck with the US and so forth. And then things slightly changed over time. And that's where this book fits in. See, what happened is we found out that the war in Iraq was based on lies. There were no weapons of mass destruction, although Flashback hints at the fact that maybe they were given to other people, so they were no longer in Iraq and then were used against Israel. We're not going there yet. But, and this is, I think, important, with these changes and the change to the Obama administration, the whole war on terror kind of thing changed again. And then we hit a very crucial situation. And that is, America stops being overtly aggressive against Islam. Don't get me wrong, there were still drone strikes and all of that stuff, but with said speech in Cairo at the university in 2009, and the whole idea of a new start and understanding and making a difference between radical Islam and normal Islam, and radical elements in the West and the rest of the West and so forth, there was a change in worldview. And if you had gone down the route of Clash of Civilizations, the Samuel Huntington misread kind of route that a lot of people went down, that felt like betrayal. And it felt like betrayal that harkened back to an answer that was already given before. It's like, why did America feel weak or seem weak to the forces that attacked, those global forces that attacked America? See, the idea of that clash of civilizations is that you have the West, the civilized West, and you have barbarism. And all of Islam is cast as barbarism in that idea. And if civilization felt weak, the answer that a lot of conservatives gave was like all the things they were already kind of unhappy with. Changes that happened mostly in the last 50 years in the US. They were sort of to blame for that seeming weakness. Those are obviously the forces of liberalism and progressivism. Ideas like feminism, maybe accepting, civil rights, maybe accepting that imperialism was not a good policy. Maybe all of these aspects. What was then termed political correctness. And yes, Dan Simmons is certainly bashing on political correctness again. Ideas that are marginalized groups being nice to, Native Americans and realizing that the US, the white US has kind of, fucked them over a lot. All of these elements are seen as that kind of weakness. Progressivism and liberalism. So with the Obama administration coming into power and at least sometimes using some of these terms of liberal politics and even thinking about healthcare and other forms of social welfare, that harkens back to that betrayal that led the United States into that position of weakness, supposedly weakness, in the minds of these conservatives. Which makes Obama the flashpoint for that kind of thing and the big bad guy of this novel. So now let's finish that part up and then look at the rest. I spoke about the recontextualizing and the national trauma of 9/11, and I want to continue about that for a second. See, what happens when a country goes into war, there is a shift in its economy to a wartime economy, which means you just focus on producing stuff that is necessary to keep the country going and the war going. And in a way, that's also what happens to a mindset. A lot of people shifted to a wartime worldview, a wartime mindset. And what that means is that you suddenly see the world not as the big mess that it is, but as a clear us versus them, a binary. It's us versus them, it's good versus evil, which is the next step because you need to justify your activities as good versus evil, and that's a Manichaean worldview, and the only end to a Manichaean worldview is an apocalyptic fight to the end. The enemy has to be destroyed. You can't just have acceptable levels of evil in the world. That's not how that works. You need to absolutely destroy that. And that's the lens through which everything you see is judged. And that's exactly what happened in that situation and what we can see in Flashback. Like, everything that is associated with them, with evil, is bad. And now you come to the point where liberalism has brought us to that situation and is now rearing its ugly head by trying to, be less of a dickhead to the rest of the world, by maybe accepting that sometimes being a bit nicer to your already marginalized groups and those less fortunate might be a good idea. And that feels like a betrayal. So the liberals, or broadly liberal, or not fully in that wartime mindset people, are cast as part of the other, of the evil. They're the enemy too. Suddenly. That means everything associated with liberalism, with progressivism, is part of evil, and has to be part of that evil. And we see that, because we have completely unrelated things that are brought up here and there in Flashback to fulfill that binary mindset. Climate change doesn't play a role in this book, but it is mentioned and made very clear several times that climate change isn't real, which is funny because in earlier books, climate change certainly was real for Dan Simmons, but climate change was a hoax. The data was faked by liberal scientists. Why? We don't know. There's no reason apart from them being evil, I guess. Renewable energies, green energies, don't work. There's no reasons for that, but apparently that's another situation that is there. Well, people, there's more of that kind of stuff. People looking for women's rights, minority rights, they're evil. There's all these very small details that are suddenly cast as part of that. And we'll see that a lot in Flashback. All of that is evil. The only good things are conservative, upstanding people living the American dream of the 1950s, modified by Reaganomics and hardcore libertarianism in Texas, where at least you don't have to wait for public health care. You can get your surgery right now if you have enough cash. And if you don't, well, fuck you, I guess. Imperialism suddenly is good. The story ends in that regard. Anyway, so you have all of these elements being cast in that binary way, and the only way to go back is that idea of a strong America with violence and a fuck you attitude to everything that would stand in its way. There you go. Now let's go to the final steps of this book. The lens and recontextualizing. See, the recontextualizing that I spoke about is important, and Dan Simmons does that. Because what Dan Simmons does is he organizes this book, Flashback, as part of his science fiction universe. It's part of the Dan Simmons Islamophobic extended universe. And how does he do that? By deliberate callbacks to older books. See, the drug Flashback is first mentioned in Hyperion, where people are using it. And he's already not exactly happy with it back then, but it gets called up again here. The global caliphate in a all-out nuclear war with a vaguely Asian-coded other force is introduced in Olympus, near the end of Olympus. And there's a bunch of other smaller, things like that dropped in here and there. These are all Dan Simmons looking at possible futures for humanity. And this one is the last one that he wrote. It's the most immediate one because it's only 20 years from publication of the book, instead of these 4,000 years in the future of Olympus, or 2,000 years in the future of Ilium and so forth. But that's still part of the same kind of universe in a way, and you need to connect those because he deliberately does so. So there's the integration into Dan Simmons' universe. And why I believe that all these elements that you see in older Dan Simmons books that we spoke about, his conservatism, they lead more or less inevitably to Flashback once you take in all these aspects of conservative thought, American politics, and the event of 9/11. That's what I was trying to explain throughout this series of videos, that these things that Dan Simmons values, education, old school education, the Western canon, a firm belief in Western superiority, you can call it chauvinism or racism, this is still here. And it was there in elements in his earlier books. Just now it's actually put out there explicitly. But it also leads to something else, because see, a lot of the things that are associated with liberalism, with progressivism, that are now absolutely evil in that wartime mindset that I spoke about, need to be fought against. And see, the problem there is a lot of these things are like, trying to be polite to people, trying to not be overtly racist, trying to not deliberately insult each and everyone all the time. Being impolite is seen as a virtue. And we see that here. We have all these weird things that pop up. There's literally 2 female characters that have more than one line of dialogue, and one of them is the mother of one of the kids, and she's Russian, and she's described with such hatred that it's insane. There's body shaming going on. She's an alcoholic, drinking in the morning. She's apparently ugly because of a lot of makeup and plastic surgery. She's only focused on herself. It's a terrible stereotype and absolute caricature. It's ugly. Because that's how that kind of lens, that wartime framework and mindset distorts everything. Because it has to, right? You're the good guys. Those are the evil guys. Who's not on our side has to be distorted, dehumanized in a way. We have more of that. There's several black people, and Dan Simmons is hung up on the N-word being reappropriated by black culture, which apparently is a bad thing. You can't reappropriate that. We fucked it up for you, so you can never use that word, is basically the white privilege version of what he's doing there. Nevertheless, he has 2 black characters there that use the N-word as their nickname or second name. There's Delroy, N-word Brown, and Bad, N-word Ajax. They're called that, like literally, unironically, which is insane. And when one of them actually has a conversation, that conversation reads like the most racist, stereotypical thing you've ever seen. You can see the blackface dripping off Dan Simmons while he's writing that, literally. It's all like every single second word is like, you know what I'm saying, and stuff like that. It's really bad. It is dehumanizing and stereotypical because you can't see the world in any other way once you're in that us versus them mindset. That's the sad part of it. And there's more of these kind of things. Now let's look at the Israel part and the right-wing insanity, and then we'll wrap it up. Dan Simmons has always had a weird fetish with Jews and Israel, and this book does follow that same situation. So Israel has been destroyed by the West, or America, not being as gung-ho in its support as Dan Simmons wanted to. Now, I'm not going into the politics here, that's his opinion. I guess we can accept that for now as his opinion. The problem is that all the survivors of the Second Holocaust are now living in America, and once the book is resolved with the Republic of Texas and the good Japanese, getting on to, nuke the fuck out of global Islam, so to speak, those Jews will be returning to Israel. Now, the idea of Jews having to return to Israel, to Zion, is... well, it's religiously coded. It is coded as part of the Book of Revelation. It has to happen before the second coming. And I think it's important to understand that. As I said, there is this apocalyptic good versus evil mindset and battle between the forces of darkness, global Islam and liberalism and so forth, and upstanding Japanese feudalism, which we don't talk about how they framed Israel, and Texan libertarianism and using a lot of weaponry. And that prophecy will be fulfilled when the Jews have returned to Israel. And that is very bad, because it's certainly a belief that certain parts of the very ultra-right-wing evangelical church do hold to, which Dan Simmons used to be skeptical of religion, I guess, at least of organized religion. I'm not sure if that's still the case, but it rings very badly down that direction, which is not a good case to support Israel if you believe you need to have all those people there so Jesus can come back. That's instrumentalizing them. That's dehumanizing Jews, again. So there's that. And there's one situation where people talk about the past and what happened to all, what one character would wish upon all those American presidents, well, once again, it's mostly Obama, that did not support Israel. And he says, I wish that president and all his administration would be hung up on lamp poles in Washington. Now, I hope you haven't read the Turner Diaries, which is a notorious right-wing hate speech text, like one of the ugliest books out there. But there's such a thing as called The Day of the Rope, which has made its way through a lot of right-wing neo-Nazi propaganda, which is exactly that. All the enemies of the new regime are being strung up on lamppoles. And I cannot believe that Dan Simmons put that into this book as a reference. But then again, it's so clear. And that I think is where we have to end this, deconstruction of Dan Simmons' whole work with some final thoughts. Dan Simmons started out as a moderately conservative libertarian writer, believing in the beauty of literature, in the beauty of old white art, but that's not a crime. Yes, he was in favor of the Western canon and so forth, and apparently he already believed in the superiority of white Western culture, in a way. And you can see that in his first books. And once that part of his worldview that he had believed in, and that he defined himself through, in a moderately liberal way, right? There was grumbling about all them kids and so forth, but that's just old white man talk, right? But once all of that was attacked, the West was attacked in his belief, and he identifies the West with the United States of America, at 9/11. That led to him rearranging everything in his mindset, putting his mind on a wartime footing, and recontextualizing everything he had believed before. And we can see that happening in Ilium, and even more in Olympus, when suddenly Islam comes up as the ultimate bad, out of nowhere, being the absolute evil that needs to be defeated. And that moves on because Dan Simmons is not willing to differentiate between radical Islamists and terrorists and the rest of Islam. He can't do that. And once the war against terror was just the war against terror, and no longer the war against global Islam. And, the rhetoric was toned down again, and more liberal values started to crop up again under Obama. He felt betrayed by his own society, which led to the writing of this book. And all that disappointment into a world that had, in the words of Stephen King, moved on, drips out of this book at every twist and turn, at every line. There's so many racist epithets in here. There's so much this insanely stupid ideas like how bad things are. 9/11 is a holiday where white people apologize for ever hurting Islam. Look, that's unrealistic to the fullest, but if you're stuck in that weird mindset of being betrayed, first being attacked by global evil and then being betrayed by the country that you love because it had moved on, I don't know if there's any way out of that specific black hole. And Flashback is the ugly result of that. And it's a sad book to read in that regard. It's a book that will make you angry because of all the actual harm that beliefs like that cause. But it's also a sad book for me because there is a very talented writer who wasn't able to ever to ever think his way out of that specific labyrinth of hatred that was fueled by a feeling of white superiority, of intellectual superiority, of Western chauvinism. He wasn't able to think his way and feel his way out of that, and that's where we end this whole. Anyway, thank you for staying with me all this time. This has certainly been a journey. If you have read all the books, let me know what you think down below. If you haven't read the books, let me know what you think down below. Please please subscribe. Join the Patreon if you feel like it. I could do with some money, certainly, but so can you, so there's no pressure there. This might just be the last video for the year. In that case, have a good one in 2023. Let's hope things move on. There's a new Dan Simmons book coming out. I'm not going to read that anytime soon, but I'm glad this is over. So yeah, until the next one, cheers.